Well, it's very disturbing, very, very disturbing. In all of my years here in Bell County and being involved with the elections, being an election judge, being a clerk, I have never, ever witnessed such an election fiasco as I have this past election.
So we showed up at the polling place, and our plan was that one of us would stay in the car because we have 4 kids and we would take turns.
Okay.
So showing up there was obviously quite a line, so we were prepared to stay a while.
Well, I went into the place to vote and looked. They saw them A through I, J, whatever it was. I located M because I'm more land. Got in line. A couple of people in front of me. People in front of me were having trouble with the lady at the registration locating their name.
We requested to write in ballots. I had recently...
The write-in or mail-in ballot?
Mail-in ballots.
Okay.
So mail-in ballots, and we never received them before the time for the early voting to be over with, and we decided, well, we're just going to go down to the early election site and vote.
Walking up to get in line, people were walking back the other way, and they told me that they had run out of Republican ballots, so you could only vote if you were a Democrat. So I went and stood in line for about 20 minutes, and then someone came out of the building and said, "We are out of ballots for Republicans."
So I got up and next in line and gave her my identification, gave her my registration card, and she started looking at my name. And first she turned to the page that has Mendez on it. And she looked down through the whole page of it. "No, you're not on that page." So she turned the page, and at the bottom of the line on the next page that she turned over was Morgan. And she said, "Nope, you're not on this page. Sorry, you can't vote."
When we came there, when we signed, they said, "Oh, you have mail-in ballots." I said, "No, we haven't. We never received them." So then we were allowed to vote, but then our ballot was put into the 2 different envelopes, which is customary, I understand, to go ahead and then be counted as a provisional ballot.
They tell people that they have to close the doors at 7, but they don't have any more ballots, so all we could do was stand there. So
They gave you no options of how they were going to resolve the problem?
they just said by law they got to close the doors at 7, and that's all they could say about that, which to me by law we're supposed to be able to vote.
And I, what? And I said, "Lady, my name is More Land, M-O-R-E. You're looking at M-O-R-G. You need to turn back 1 page." So she took and she turned the page back. But she didn't turn 1 page, she turned 2 pages back. We did this 3 times in a row.
I was told there that, I said, when we found out about it, I wondered what can we do or what should we do? The election judge said she really didn't know what needed to be done. It's rather confusing, and I don't feel comfortable with what happened. I don't know
Okay.
if our ballot was counted.
I dismissed it until I got home, and my wife says she had the same problem with the same lady. My mind said immediately, this lady is trying to prevent me from voting. But I got my ballot and I went and voted. Took care, did my civic duty like I was supposed to do.
My daughter went in to vote, or actually that afternoon, went in to vote. She's with a different one because her name is with a G. She didn't have a problem, but my son went in, which is also Moreland, to vote. And then again, they couldn't find his name. So he got a little put out about the whole thing, and as he was leaving, this when my daughter was coming in, and she went in and she said, "There's a book that you can sign if you can't find the name." And she looked over and the lady says, "Yeah, there is a book that they can sign." She said, "Well, I didn't know that." She says, "I've already turned away 4 or 5 people."
On election night, people started coming into where we were watching the election results, and it's the Bell County Expo Center, and started telling me about events that were happening at different precincts where either they voted or didn't get to vote, or where they were running out of ballots.
Well, it started off, we were so steady that after about noontime, I recalculated how many we were doing per hour,
Yes.
and it was increasing. And then I called at 1:30, I called the county elections for 150 more ballots. And about an hour later, I got 22.
Well, I know there was many different locations that ran out of ballots, and at most of those places, people did end up having to stay in line. I know there were some people in Troy that ended up not voting. I heard that in Morgan's Point, which was precinct 104, there was a huge line that built up, and there was a good number of people there that I was told got turned away because, you know, it was just too late, or I don't know what all the reasons were, but they ended up not being able to vote at all.
When we had to deliver all our extra material and everything
Sure.
back to the election headquarters in Belton, and it was close to 8:30. The Democrat alternate judge went with me, or followed me,
Right.
to the what they call the tank,
Yes.
to deliver the election materials. And when we got there, there were people in the parking lot screaming and yelling, this, you know, there's a mob riot at my precinct. And, you know, people are mad as everything. And they're not getting to vote. And I said, what is going on? And they were telling me that so many places ran out of ballots.
So I called and acknowledged receipt of those and said I need about 125 more. I need a total of 150. And about 3:30 we got 76.
And we ran out of ballots again before the second batch came in. And I think some people did leave then. They weren't gonna hang around.
I heard a lot of the other locations ran out of ballots, and that came from one of the workers that was making copies of ballots to send out to other locations. So, and what I heard specifically was all but 4 or 5 locations had ran out of ballots.
I believe around 4:30, 4:45, somewhere around that time, the polling place in Rogers ran out of ballots. I saw, you know, multiple people drive up, go inside the building, and then about an hour later, I was like, wow, they're still not coming back out. And then I found out that, yeah, they had ran out of ballots and they were waiting for those to come in. So there was quite a line that built up in this pretty small town because there was very large voter turnout.
But I did hear that at various precincts, including Rogers, I think, they were offering people in the Republican line Democrat ballots to vote on. And those people were saying, absolutely not, I want to vote Republican.
We ran out at 6:15 in the evening. And at that time, they were already into this mode of having precincts just copy them wherever they could.
Then later, I went to the exposition center where all the TVs were set up and everything just to see what the returns were showing. And I learned there what a fiasco it had been, and so many places were sending one of their clerks out to a Xerox machine somewhere to make copies of the ballots. Some were even using sample ballots that we had to post on the wall for voters to come in and look at before they voted.
We wound up we had 19 people in line at 7 o'clock when the polls closed. And 4 of those left, they chose not to stay. So we had 15 that stayed, and we eventually got the ballot copies by about 7:40 or so.
I could not have been more shocked when I talked to Shirley Stevens, who's an officer in the Women's Republican organization. She said she worked the polls. She was either a poll watcher or an election judge. In her precinct, they ran out of ballots more than once. They had to go and have ballots reprinted. She said at the end of the day, at 7, there were over 50 people standing in line. Some of them waited to vote, but she said many people did not wait.
In one place, they closed the doors at 7 o'clock, and people standing in line past a certain line, they couldn't vote even though they were there. In other places, they kept the doors open until 9 o'clock, until everybody had a chance to vote.
I believe that the ballots did eventually get delivered. I had to end up leaving that location around 6:30, 6:45. And at that point, there was still people waiting in line to vote. No, actually, I take that back. It was probably around 7 o'clock when I left. And I don't know this for sure, but I was told by someone who had gone in to vote that they did extend the time. They said, well, you know, it's probably going to take 30 minutes to get ballots here, so we'll let people stay extra 30 minutes. But I did see some people go in to vote and then walk back out and leave because they couldn't wait that long.
They said that the polls in Rogers stayed open till after 8:30. I mean, I guess they stopped the line, but people were still in line at 8:30 waiting for ballots to be delivered.
Those that I talked to did get to vote, so they didn't really have to wait like the ones that people in Moffett did. But, you know, when they had the recount for Molly White and Hugh Shine, you know, whether they're concerned that some of their ballots and votes were cast aside as well. You know, if Molly really lost by 104 votes, then 118, that doesn't seem like a lot, but, you know, that's 14 votes that someone else on the list may have missed, you know, because of all those sample ballots being hand counted. And I'm assuming that's how they knew which ballots to count, is the sample ballots. But if we had had a copy machine, we could have printed off all of our copies. But who's to say someone didn't print off copies and make their own marks on them?
And I didn't know any of this stuff. I stayed in my precinct, or you know, all day long. And yes, they did run out of ballots twice, but they were able to get what they needed. But when I started hearing reports about, you know, the shortage of ballots, and then people being turned away and not being allowed to vote. And then those reports started coming in as the days following the election, even up until today. And it was very, very concerning. I could not believe that anybody would be turned away from voting if there was a question. Now, if they're not a registered voter, then we can understand that. But if they're a registered voter and they're not on a list, or they're standing in line and before time runs out and said to go home, that's very concerning.
If you show up to vote, you know, we should, you know, provide a way that you get your voice heard. You know, if you don't show up on election day, if you don't show up before 7 o'clock to vote, you know, that's on you. But if you do show up and the election administration just has failed and doesn't have ballots there for you, then that's their problem. That's not yours, and they should do everything to remedy that.
I think it was unfortunate that a lot of people did not get to vote.
All I could say is I know how elections are thrown.
And
Now I've seen it.
So based on what you experienced that day, you feel very strongly that someone potentially could have done a lot of side work to move the votes in a certain direction.
Right.
It's been very disturbing, and the more reports that I hear that are coming in daily, I'm getting emails or phone calls, the more disturbed I am. And when I see precincts that I should have clearly won, that I lost by maybe 1 or 20 or 40, it just causes me to question, are those the precincts that had such trouble? And I know most of them are.
Do you feel like voters had their rights to vote denied them, at least some?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
I gotta ask you, as an American, how did that feel not being able to vote?
Awful. My voice isn't being heard. Like my rights are being ripped away from me. Kind of make you feel like a criminal a little bit for some reason or another. But I think that's about
Your rights denied, yeah.
Exactly.
And a
rights
criminal's rights are denied them, yeah.
Exactly.
There needs to be another election.
Yeah.
Whatever you call it, it was not fair. Running out of ballots, standing in line, people not being able to vote, and being that close, 108 votes. I believe there needs to be a re-vote.
I think the election ought to be redone for there's a difference of 110 votes between Hugh Shine and Molly White. I think they need to call a special election and rerun that.
Given that so few of the races are very, very, very close, you're talking about within 3 digits, I would allow for a revote.